I'm Kate Fitzgerald with Brilliant Life Community. I'm speaking with Dawn Paulson, an occupational therapist with Minneapolis Public Schools. Hello, and thank you for joining me.
Oh, hello.
To you.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm just so glad to have the opportunity to talk with you.
Thank you. Okay, let me ask you, who are your clients?
Well, I guess in order to answer that, I'll back up just a little bit. So just to orient, I'm an occupational therapist, and early on in my career was a clinic-based occupational therapist. And then my husband and I together formed a company that provided in-home services for children with autism. And through that, I saw children in the clinic, but also consulted and coordinated with the in-home program to infuse the people who are working in homes with knowledge on sensory integration, or just ideas about things that they could do or ways of thinking about children that might help that therapy be even more effective. So then, several years later, we sold our company and I transitioned to doing school-based therapy services. So it's been really fun for me to, as an OT, be able to work both in clinic to infuse kind of OT ideas into home-based settings, but also now in my more recent work, being able to bring that knowledge to the school setting. So right now I'm working in a variety of charter schools in the greater Twin Cities metro area, and the children there are anywhere from the pre-K age, so 3 and 4-year-olds, all the way up through high school.
Great. How are you working with your clients during the pandemic?
Oh, that has been
Quite the challenge.
That has been interesting. The specific position I am in right now is I am an OT, and so do work directly with students, but I also am a supervisor of other OTs that work within our company, and so am in charge of helping to support the work and mentor them and answer questions as far as how they're doing the work in the schools. During the pandemic, with regards to extending, moving our services to distance learning, that's been pretty tricky. And what we're finding in the charter school kind of world is that each charter school, the way that it's set up, they act as their own district. So each district has kind of a different way of doing things and different technology platforms. And so it's been a little tricky to divide or to provide OT services in the schools during the pandemic. That being said, we've risen to the challenge and we've had to get creative. And in one of our staff meetings, the founder of our company asked who had provided online therapy services before, and not one person raised their hand out of 20 therapists. And a week later, we all had provided online occupational therapy services. So it was quite a shift to move to that virtual platform. And the way that we, in the school population, we work with children typically either in their classrooms or pulled for short amounts of time into a separate room to work on to target specific skills. One of the really wonderful aspects of virtual learning, distance learning, was that we were able to connect, just by the nature of the students being in the home, connect more with parents. And so that really opened up in a new way and in an easier way, just that constant communication between therapists and parents, and gave us the ability to not only, report back to the classroom teacher, this is what we worked on, this is what you can follow up with in your class, but also then report back to the parents and include parents in our sessions if that's something they wanted to do. And, answer any questions they might have or give suggestions and ideas. So that was really a positive of distance learning. It was also really hard because there were new challenges with students. The students I work with have been identified as students who struggle, have gone through an evaluation process, have qualified for occupational therapy services, as well as other special education services. And so these are students who are already struggling to be able to take advantage of the content that's being delivered in the classroom, and then to add a pandemic and distance learning on top of it just was another layer of struggle for a lot of these students. And so just finding new and innovative ways to reach them was a challenge that we were successful with in varying degrees, but not for lack of effort.
Well, it's all a new learning platform, so it's great that you guys are out there and figuring out how to plug in with your clients. That's wonderful. Yeah. And do you work in all the Minneapolis schools?
So the company I work for is called Integrative Therapy, and they provide occupational therapy services to children in the charter school setting. So charter schools are a public school. They're free and accessible to students who are interested in going there. What's a little different about charter schools is that they often have a niche, either idea or target population of students that they cater to. And often charter schools start very small, and so their need for occupational therapy, an occupational therapist, isn't quite the same as it would be for St. Paul public or Minneapolis public school system. They may have a need for a half a day a week of OT services or 2 days a week of OT services. So that's why instead of hiring their own, they oftentimes contract out to an agency who would then provide those therapists who could provide those services. So within that the company I work for, we serve 23 different charter schools in the Twin Cities metro. So not all in Minneapolis. We have schools all over the metro that we serve, and therapists all over the metro who work for us and going into those schools.
I just really don't know too much about occupational therapy. And if their pediatrician, therapist, or psychiatrist doesn't recommend it or refer, they're missing out on some important therapies that OTs can provide. What types of behaviors in children could benefit from working with an OT?
That's a really great question. And I love it when people ask that question, because OT is one of those professions that not a lot of people know about. And then when they hear about, they get really excited about what the possibilities are. So, people hear occupational therapy and they think, oh, do you help people find jobs, like occupation? Yeah, that's one of the things we do, but that's not the big thing we do. The occupation in occupational therapy really refers to, as opposed to a job, it refers to what are the occupations in which a person engages in everyday life, and supporting a child and an adolescence and adults' ability to engage in those occupations. So that could mean for a child, their occupation is school, and their occupation is playing with friends, and their occupation is being able to participate in their family life. That's what's occupying their time. Those are the areas of life in which they want to engage. We can help support skills as far-ranging as learning how to brush your teeth, because that is something that one needs to do in life, to learning how to engage with others, to learning how to manage your feelings if they're getting in the way of you being able to participate in the things in life that you are wanting to participate in. It could be helping you figure out and sort through things like, how do you calm your body in order to sleep at night? So OT really is pretty wide-ranging. Could be working on physical skills, like in the schools, handwriting is a big area of OT, or being able to access written communication. visual motor activities. Really, it is pretty wide ranging, which gets kind of confusing for people. I often say when I'm meeting with parents and they're learning about OT for the very first time, it's we help you. And, and now I'm specifically talking about children and adolescents because that's my area of expertise and focus. But what is it that you or your child wants to be able to do, and then let's think and problem solve about how to get them there. We're working from the inside out and helping them grow in their body and gain new skills from the inside out to be able to do whatever it is they want to do. But it could be also adapting the environment. I'll just use an example of a student in school learning how to write. Well, what's getting in the way of learning how to write? And it may be that student has visual motor issues and, pen and paper, putting pen to paper, and then is struggling with the motor control to be able to write letters. Well, we work to get that child more motor control and visual motor control, but it also may be that we add supports, outside supports. We decrease the expectation or the writing load on them and have them complete small portions of writing and then be able to complete the rest on a computer. So we kind of think and problem solve and find that just right place between encouraging growth and skill expansion, and then also providing environmental supports where needed to help them be successful. The big areas that we target in the schools, and actually just in general with a lot of the students I end up seeing, is in that area of self-regulation, the ability to manage one's feelings, an internal state. So it might be frustration or excitement or sleepiness or whatnot, but the ability to manage one's internal state in a way that allows them to successfully engage in the task at hand, whatever that task might be. So that task might be sitting at dinner with your family. That task might be paying attention in school to your teacher, but equipping them with skills and strategies and knowledge to help them manage those big feelings in a way that helps them be able to successfully engage in the activities they want to engage in.
Do you work with students on the autism spectrum?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, my career really started with kind of initially working with students with a wide variety of diagnoses, but it just so happened that a large portion of them had a diagnosis of autism. And then specifically when my husband and I started the therapy clinic together, that was specifically an in-home program for children with autism. And so I saw a lot of those children in the outpatient setting, and then also consulted with the in-home program. Moving now where I'm at in the schools, we see a really wide range of diagnoses in the children that we work with, and they could have a medical diagnosis, or they could just simply be struggling in school and have no medical diagnosis whatsoever. We see that if a child does have a diagnosis of autism and is struggling to access the educational content in the schools, that will qualify them to receive special education services. And also that's not the only diagnosis and as I said before, that you don't need a medical diagnosis in the schools in order to be able to access OT services. You need some demonstrated need for services that are based on a variety of criteria. That's when OT would be added as a part of that student's individualized educational plan.
So before the quarantine, did you go into schools and work with so many students at a time?
Yeah, in the schools, OT services can be delivered both individually and in a group. Often OT services can push into the classroom. We might be working with a student in the context of the whole classroom environment, supporting. The role of OT really is, in the schools, really is to support their ability to access their education. And so to help get them the skills they need in order to be able to complete their classroom assignments, in order to be able to interact with their peers, to be able to complete assignments that are legible and able to be read by their teachers. So a lot of that actually can be done by pushing directly into that environment and supporting them there, supporting whatever their needs are as identified on their individualized education plan. And so it could look like cueing them for, oh, it looks like you're starting to feel a little frustrated. What are some things that you could do right now in this moment that's going to help you be able to calm your body in order to pay attention to your teacher who's trying to teach you? Or it could be, oh, okay, I see you're working on your handwriting. Now remember, when you are making your letters, what are the things you think about to make sure that your teacher can read your letters? And, for each student, that's going to be different. But another way that we work with students is to pull them from the classroom, either individually or in small groups. Oftentimes it does, when we first get a student on our caseload, it is individualized treatment or individual therapy sessions, because what we're really trying to do is give the students just a baseline framework for what we're working on and really target specific skills that will help them get caught up to where we're wanting them to be it in the realm of self-regulation, sort of sensory processing kinds of things, or in the realm of motor skills. And then once we've kind of laid a framework and a foundation, oftentimes we will then group them with one or two other students who are all working on the same skills. And then in that environment too, we're able to deliver instruction, but also then they have the peer socialization and support. So it both challenges them to learn those skills in the context of other students. They're challenged in a different way, but also it motivates them because they oftentimes enjoy that social participation with other students and learning something in a group setting.
Great. Can you tell us about sensory integration and how that might play a role?
Yeah, so that's another really great question. Sensory integration is kind of a big, broad umbrella topic that refers to how do we take in information from our environment through our eyes, our ears, our skin, our smell, our taste. How do we take that information in both from our environment, but also from our body? So how does our brain take in that information and sort through it, make sense of it in order for us to have an adaptive response to situations that is functional and successful and gets us where we want to be? As we move through our lives, we're constantly doing this process of sensory integration on a subconscious level. When something disrupts that process, or when wires get crossed in brains, or when bodies aren't sending the information in a way that is accessible or in a way that the brain is able to make sense of, that's when things kind of start to go haywire. And so, one example of this might be students who a light touch on their shoulder or arm gets misinterpreted, misinformed, and might result in them reaching out and hitting their peer because it's been interpreted as in a way that signals alert, signals kind of that fight response. And so really working with the body systems to help, I would say, to help clarify or help them become better discerners of sensory input is the goal of sensory integration. So to help that input be able to be processed in a way that is functional, that allows for adaptive responses that help a child be successful. The big answer is yes, we work with sensory integration all the time. It's just part of what I do. I don't necessarily differentiate in my practice, oh, I'm doing sensory integration right now, because I really view sensory integration as something we're all doing all the time. Sensory integration for me is really the foundation of what I do, how I work. I work with a lot of kids especially in the charter school situation, who have dealt with trauma. And so their systems are naturally set up because of their history and background with trauma. They're biased for that flight, fight, fright very easily. Oftentimes, due to the trauma that children have experienced, their nervous systems have changed. It's almost as though they've forgotten what it feels like to be in a calm, regulated state where they feel safe. They're always on alert. And so working with children to help give their nervous systems a sense of safety, a sense of security, a sense of connectedness, so that when they get sensory input, their bias isn't to see it as potentially where they need to protect themselves, but that they can start to broaden the window of tolerance for sensory input, or the window of regulation. Children who come from a trauma background often are, like I said, biased towards interactions, sensory input, and it's functional. In the past, they've learned that this could be dangerous. And so they're quicker to respond in a way that's protective. So one of the ways we work with students is to help them get regulated and help them both from the inside and the outside with cognitive strategies realize when their body is reacting this way, and figure out what works for them in order to help their nervous systems get into a more balanced sympathetic, parasympathetic state.
Terrific. Can you tell me about sensory diet?
So sensory diet is one of the tools we use to help a child get into that regulated state. So by regulated state, I mean a state of being in which you're feeling alert, you're feeling calm, you're feeling able to participate in the activities of your daily life. I'll use that example. Or too dysregulated is kind of in more of an alert state, a hyper alert state, or a hyper responsive state, an over responsive state. And that oftentimes really functionally looks like kids who aren't able to pay attention, and kids who are picking fights with other kids, and kids who are constantly moving, kids who can't sit still in class, kids who get distracted by what's going on outside the window or by the sound of somebody tapping their pencil. And on the other end of the spectrum, there's kids who are maybe dysregulated, but for them it looks like they're too low. So they're falling asleep and they're just like kind of zoning out, or they're like slumping, and so what we do with children is we look at and kind of help. It's a process of us assessing and evaluating, but also of helping them self-assess and self-evaluate, and really looking at how are you? Where are you on this sort of scale of regulation? How are you feeling today in this moment? And where do you need to be? And what tools do we know will help get you there? And those tools, for students who don't process muscle information and vestibular information quite the way that in a more refined way, oftentimes they need more movement. And so how can we get you more movement? How can we get you that muscle input and that movement input that helps you be able to come to a more regulated, active alert state? The same is actually true for kids who are too low. Sometimes, they really need movement to help bring them up. So movement and heavy work are two things that in a sensory diet would be things that are helpful oftentimes for kids to help achieve a regulated state. When we talk about sensory diet, what we're really referring to is just as you need your fruits and your vegetables, your carbs, your proteins, your fats every day at intervals throughout the day in order to function your best. You also need sensory input at regular intervals throughout the day in order to function your best. And for each of us, that's going to be different. So, and we do it as adults. We don't realize we do it, but we do. Every time I give an in-service, I ask the adults who I'm giving an in-service to, okay, so who needs their coffee in the morning? Who needs their hot shower in the morning? Who needs quiet time before they talk to anyone? Who, when they're done with work, has to go work out in order to be, or conversely, who, when they're done with work, needs to shut down and just have quiet for 20 minutes before then they're ready to go on with the rest of their day. We're all finding ways to regulate ourselves every day. With the children we work with, something has gone awry. And so something has gotten in the way of them being able to kind of just naturally do it without thinking about it. A sensory diet really is the way to specifically put in activities or sensory activities or experiences throughout a day that we know will be helpful and regulating for a specific child. And that those activities are going to be different depending on the individual child, but really looking at what's a day in their life and where are currently the areas that they're most struggling in, and what can we do before those times to be able to set their nervous systems up better to be able to then be more successful, especially during those times, but really throughout the day. So it could be getting movement in, it could be getting oral motor input. It could be as simple as chewing gum, or as complex as a full-fledged, 15-minute mini intense workout. So it could be turning down the lights and making sure there's no fluorescent lighting, because that kind of lighting really makes, for some children, their nervous system super alert and kind of in a dysregulating sort of way. It could be making sure that they, a lot of students are calmed by deep pressure and heavy touch. So we'll use weighted blankets to help literally calm their nervous systems. Could be using music, or certain smells for kids might be organizing or regulating. So we look at all the systems of the body in which sensory input comes in, and then we ask, in the system of vision, do we declutter your room, or do we turn down the lights, or do we turn up the lights, but in taste and touch and smell and sight and hearing, in movement, in muscle input, how can we tweak each of those things in a specific way for this specific student in order to get them what they need to help their body their nervous system be regulated.
What sets you apart from other occupational therapists?
I think I'll answer that question more broadly, and then we've kind of come full circle then with this. Where we started is, what is OT? OTs can work in adult rehab, so helping adults who have had strokes gain back the functional skills they need to in order to go back to being successful in their everyday lives, be it getting dressed in the morning or paying their bills. In the mental health area, therapists work a lot with getting people the skills they need, both functional everyday life skills, balancing a checkbook, or making sure that you're doing the skills you need to do everyday, hygiene, budgeting, those sorts of things. In the same way, how do we manage our emotions, and how can I teach you ways to manage your emotions so that when episodes come up or spikes come up that you're struggling with. There's a part of OT that works with literally going back to work. A person who maybe works at a factory and has been injured on the job, how do we get you rehabbed in a way that then you're going to be able to go back to work and do your job safely without getting re-injured. So looking at all of that in the schools, working with students to help them access their education. What sets me apart, or I guess another way of answering that question would be, what's my area of expertise? My area and passion is working with children. I've spent my entire 25 plus years of being a therapist, all working with children. I work primarily from a sensory integration foundation and then add layers on top of that to the work that I do with students. I'm also particularly interested in mind-body approaches. I'm a registered yoga teacher. I have infused things I've learned about, I've taken the the 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course. I've done a lot of trainings on mindfulness, and I've infused that work into the work, or that what I've learned there, I've infused parts of that into what I do. I also have taken courses in somatic sensory motor psychotherapy, which is something Pat Ogden developed. What that framework is kind of coming from, again, in how does one's experience in trauma live in the body, and how can we then use the body in helping to heal those experiences. So I've infused my work with knowledge that I gained from that training as well. For me, I think, and this happens to anyone who's been a practitioner for many, many, many years, I've had a lot of time. So I've had a great opportunity to kind of seek out other training or another field. The sensory motor psychotherapy training I did, I was the only OT, and it was a 6-month training full of psychologists. But really what we're doing is talking about the same thing in a different way, continually trying to bridge. I think, because my husband is a psychologist and we talk all the time, that's just what we do. We're kind of like, our Friday nights are like super exciting, talking about like, ooh, what do you think about this idea in relation to our work? But I think, that is part of why I'm always looking well within my scope of OT, but how do I form bridges with other professionals who have a common goal? And the common goal is to help the child or the student or the adult be able to flourish in their world, in their community, in their families, in their bodies. Collaborating and working with other professionals, I have found to be just personally very fulfilling, and also really effective in expanding how we all think about supporting these individuals. I guess that's a long-winded way of saying I don't know that I'm really all that different, but those are my passions. I think we're all unique and different, and my passions, really are continually looking at collaborating, at learning different ways of thinking about things, and how that applies to my work as an OT.
Wonderful. Is there anything else that we should know?
Well, particularly in this moment, no. I'm sure when I look back at the film, I'll be like, oh, I should have said that or that. But really, we're all learning and growing, and I think my message always to anyone is just to be open to seek out resources, to seek out information. I would say, if anything I've said has piqued your interest and you want to know more, reach out and we'll talk more.
Wonderful. Well, Dawn, thank you very much for your time today. We appreciate all the great works that you do in the community, and I look forward to speaking to you again.
Well, thank you so much. It was fun.
Great. Thank you. Take care.
All right, you too.